Hi, I'm Alan Watt, best-selling novelist and writing teacher. If you're looking for a community, accountability, free resources, come check us out. Just click the link below. Let's talk about the tragic hero. In this video, I'm going to cover the tragic hero archetype. We're going to look at the key traits of the tragic hero. I'm going to investigate the difference between the tragic hero and the anti-hero. And then we're going to look at two contemporary classics, Breaking Bad and Gone Girl, and how both protagonists begin with this sort of impotent rage, but how they go in very different directions. Tragic hero, anti-hero, very different, but they're often confused. And then finally, toward the end of this video, I want to go deep. I want to let go of all the academic stuff, and I want to show you how, if you're up for it, you can write a really powerful tragedy with a tragic hero that's going to be cathartic and it's going to be transformative for your reader. Okay, so let's jump in and get started. What is a tragic hero? Well, the tragic hero archetype is a primal, recurring character type found across all storytelling. That's what an archetype is, a primal, recurring character. Aristotle defined the tragic hero as not purely good or evil, but brought down by their own error or frailty. So something happens and the tragic hero responds in a way where they experience a fall. All right, so they begin as this basically decent person, but by the end of the story, they just make these incremental choices that lead them further and further down until it costs them their soul. Carl Jung originated the term archetype. He referred to them as universal images that reside in our collective unconscious. We all recognize archetypes when we see them. You know, there's the fool, the mentor, the trickster, the outcast, the innocent, the caregiver, the rebel. The key with the tragic hero is that they must earn our sympathy first and then fall because of their own flaws. Okay, it's important to understand, tragic hero, not a villain. If they're a villain, we're not going to care about them. But they're also not perfectly innocent, because if they did, we'd be shocked. It wouldn't really make sense. We wouldn't experience pity. And pity is the thing that's driving your narrative, is we're pitying them because Walter White is in this circumstance. This guy he's got this impotent rage. He wants to be a good chemistry teacher. He wants to take care of his family. He wants to be a decent man. And then he gets this diagnosis. He's got cancer. And so based on his circumstance, he makes a choice that sets him on a course to tragedy. All right? And that's the key thing in your story, is that there is some kind of circumstance that causes them to make a choice that begins their fall. Let's talk about the 5 key traits of a tragic hero. The first trait is that they must hold a position of respect. All right, when you think about Oedipus or Walter White, they are talented, they're admired, they're seen as basically moral people. Look at Michael Corleone. Holds a position of respect. He's come home a war hero. Very important. We need to admire your hero in the beginning, or there will be no context for their fall. They've got a fatal flaw. A fatal flaw. Aristotle called it hamartia. Hamartia. Pride, ambition, obsession, stubbornness. What's that fatal flaw? Okay, in the end of this video, I'm going to get into how you can dramatize this fatal flaw. Because it's one thing to intellectualize it and go, oh my God, they've got pride. But as Terence, the Roman philosopher, said, nothing human is alien to me. Nothing human is alien to me. In other words, if you're going to write a great tragedy, you got to find this in yourself. You have to find it in yourself, because that's where you're going to let go of this academic idea of pride, and you're going to start to recognize the dilemma of pride. All right, you look at Walter White's dilemma. He's got a dilemma, the powerful desire and a false belief. A dilemma is a problem that can't be solved without creating a new problem. So he's got a powerful desire, right? He wants more out of life. That's what every tragic hero wants. They want more in one way or another. Ambition, ego, pride. I deserve more. And they got a false belief. What's the false belief? I'm entitled to it. That's the tragedy. All right. Position of respect, fatal flaw, personal responsibility. Your protagonist must take or have personal responsibility. Their ruin must come from their own choices. It can't be external. It's not a deus ex machina. It's not an act of God. They must take personal responsibility. Walter White is personally responsible for the choice of becoming a meth dealer. It's got to be, number 4, a significant downfall. It can't just be a minor drop. We need to see their descent into the pits of hell. From success and happiness to loss, ruin, or death. They don't have to die. They often do, but death is not necessary. It's the loss of their soul that matters. And then finally, there's an inevitability. And this is what makes a tragedy so, I hesitate to use the word fun to watch, but so mesmerizing. Because there's something inevitable about this descent into hell. With every subsequent choice your protagonist makes, it's like we're watching a slow motion train wreck. We're going, oh my God, of course. In other words, on some level, we are the protagonist as we're watching this movie or this play or reading this book. We understand the choices that they're making. Once the flaw sets things in motion, which is typically your inciting incident, the fate cannot be escaped. There's a difference between tragic hero and antihero. Okay, so let's look at two classics. There's Walter White from Breaking Bad, and then there's Amy Dunne from Gone Girl. There's a lot of debate about Amy because some people think of her as a classic villain, but there's a really strong argument for her being an anti-hero. And here's what I mean by that, is that consider that we live in a toxic patriarchy where Amy is seen by some as a sociopath. And what she does is absolutely sociopathic. She murders an innocent guy. She does a lot of really dangerous, malicious, disturbing things. But if you think in terms of the fact that she's a natural response to a dysfunctional world, then it's a good argument that she is a feminist anti-hero. And that's where I lean. So here's the difference. Walter White and Amy Dunne are both filled with this impotent rage. They begin the story as characters who are small in some way. But the difference is that with the anti-hero, they operate outside conventional morality. They tend to be rebellious. They have a code. All right. They're willing to get their hands dirty. So this is what Amy does. The difference is that with tragic heroes, they elicit pity, while anti-heroes elicit fascination. Okay, so let's look at the difference. Here are some examples of anti-heroes. Scarlett O'Hara, Alex DeLarge from Clockwork Orange. Some people might think that he's a pure villain, but that's not what Kubrick is getting at. When you look at Alex DeLarge, he is this very charismatic guy who then is brought into a system that wants to normalize him and ask the question, is it evil to try to change someone to become good? Humbert from Lolita is an anti-hero. Tony Soprano, anti-hero. Even though he dies in the end, this is about somebody who is operating outside of conventional morality. Okay, so let's look at Walter White and Amy Dunne. Walter White and Amy Dunne are mirror images of each other. Walt is tragic, Amy anti-hero. Both are driven by a refusal to stay small. Walt is a brilliant chemist. He spent decades feeling overlooked and underpaid. Amy Dunne, also brilliant woman. She has been objectified by her parents. She was called Amazing Amy. She has been mistreated by her husband. He cheated on her. And the story begins with her having this response. So both stories are about finally stopping playing by the rules and going all in. Walt's fatal flaw is pride. He tells himself he's doing it for his family, but with each subsequent episode, we recognize that it's really about ego and feeling powerful. By the end, his ego destroys everything he loves. He dies alone, having lost the only things that ever. Amy doesn't have a fatal flaw in that sense. She's too controlled. She's too conniving, too self-aware to be undone by herself. Okay, so where Walt's pride blinds her, Amy's pride sharpens her. Her anger at Nick, having to perform for everybody in her life, fills her with rage. And that is what drives the narrative for Amy. We watch in amazement at the lengths that she will go to get what she thinks she deserves. Okay, so that's the crucial difference between a tragic hero and an anti-hero. Walt earns our pity, Amy earns our fascination, because there is no fall. She walks back into her life untouchable. Catharsis never comes for the anti-hero. For both stories, the transformation is for the audience. Okay? Both characters are defiant until the end. For Walt, it costs him his life. For Amy, she becomes godlike, but it costs her connection to everybody else. Okay, I want to talk to you about how you can write the most dynamic and compelling tragedy with a tragic hero that we're all going to relate to in some way. Can you tell I love tragedies? I would say my three favorite tragedies are The Hustler with Paul Newman, Cool Hand Luke with Paul Newman, and Cat on a Hot Tin Roof with Paul Newman. I guess my favorite tragic hero is Paul Newman. HUD too, with Paul Newman. So how do you write a great tragic hero? Well, we can talk about pride and hubris and ambition and jealousy, and they can exist as kind of ideas, or we can look at the origin of the tragic hero archetype. It's not Oedipus. It's not Roman. It's not Greek. It's biblical. And as soon as I say it, you're going to go, oh yeah, of course. It's Lucifer. The ultimate fall from grace was Lucifer, who was God's closest angel, God's beloved angel. And what did Lucifer want? He wanted to be God. Think about that. Notice where that lives in every one of us. And if right now you're going, oh, no, I can't relate to that. Well, if you can't relate to that, you're not going to be able to write a tragic hero. Remember what Terence, the Roman philosopher, said, nothing human is alien to me. Nothing human is alien to me. In other words, this archetype lives within us for a reason, because it's universal. So it's not that we want to be God. It's why we want to be God. Because being God means we can shrug off our mortality. All right? The only thing that's worse than being alive is the alternative. But being alive, being human, requires suffering. Being human requires suffering. And so it is natural for every human being on some level or other to want to move beyond that, to be God, to be immortal, to be free of the vicissitudes of life, from having to feel grief or shame or embarrassment, to know the answer as opposed to being unsure and filled with doubt. And am I about to make a terrible life choice? So notice where it lives for you, this desire to be godlike. Because when you look at the great tragic heroes, Oedipus, Achilles, Medea, what does she want? She is enraged at her husband's infidelity. And her rage transmutes into this madness and this violence. So the dilemma that your tragic hero is struggling with, remember, a dilemma is a problem that can't be solved without creating another problem. So pride is dramatized as a dilemma. A dilemma is a powerful desire and a false belief. So pride is, I no longer want to be impotent. I don't want to be on the bottom. I want to be on the top. I want to be God. I want to dominate. I want to control. I don't want to be taken advantage of anymore. The tragic hero takes that to the end of the road. I am never going to be taken advantage of anymore. Okay. And so every subsequent choice they make leads them on their journey straight into hell. So Lucifer, the angel, ends up as Satan. Michael Corleone begins, he's almost saint-like. He's a war hero. And by the end of it, he kills his brother. He has no love for his wife. He becomes the devil in some way. So notice where that lives for your protagonist in the story, because that's the journey that they're going to take. It's not in your tragedy. It's not that your protagonist dies at the end. It's worse. They lose their soul. That's the tragedy. Tragedy is not what happens. It's the meaning we ascribe to what happens. In some tragedies, protagonist does not die. But at the end, they experience something worse than death, is that now they are forced to live in the shrieking void of their own cowardice. The thing to understand about your tragedy is that these are cautionary tales, and that the purpose of every story is to reveal a transformation. But in the tragic hero archetype, transformation is for your audience or your reader. We become transformed as a result of witnessing this descent into hell. And so we leave a great tragedy with a sense of being humbled. We recognize the fragility of life, and we are grateful for what we have. You know, by the end of any great tragedy, all we want to do is hug our loved ones a little bit tighter. Click the link below. I'm going to send you a free ebook that will help you structure your tragedy. And if you're looking for community, accountability, and lots of free resources, check us out. Just click the link below. I'll see you soon.